Good evening, everyone. I'm Brieanna Fisher, Social Media Manager for Democracy for America.
And I'm Charles Chamberlain, Executive Director for DFA. And tonight we're excited to be joined by a longtime friend of Democracy for America's. That's Senator Bernie Sanders. Now, Senator Sanders has continued to be a leading progressive voice in the Senate. His recent introduction of Medicare for All has inspired thousands across the country to not only fight back against Trump care, but to fight for something that will benefit all Americans.
You know what, Charlie? Senator Sanders isn't just working in the Senate. Yet this year he actually traveled across the country, lending his support to candidates participating in elections up and down the ballot, including some of our very own endorsed candidates like Bob Quist in Montana. And you know what? Tonight I am so excited because this is going to be a fantastic discussion with Senator Sanders. Right now, DFA members have sent in a bunch of great pre-submitted questions for the senator, and I am ready to get started. But first, for everyone that's on the call, if you do have a live question, please press 0 on your phone, and you'll be connected with the DFA staff member. Again, you can press 0 right now or anytime during the call if you'd like to ask a question. Or if you're listening to this call on democracyforamerica.com, you can also submit a question through the live stream in the box on the right.
All right, that's great instructions, but enough of that. Let's get straight to the call. So with that, I'd like to welcome Senator Bernie Sanders to the call.
Charlie, it's great to be with you, and Brieanna, good job.
Excellent. Thanks so much for joining us, Senator. You know, it's been a few months since we endorsed you back, for your campaign for president, and what an exciting campaign that was with all the support, the incredible campaign you ran, the support from DFA members across the country, from activists, from independents, from Democrats, to progressives all across the country. It was very exciting to watch you win 22 contests and come just this close to winning the actual nomination itself. And it's really exciting to get a chance to have you talk with us and with our members again here tonight. Do you have anything you want to sort of open with?
Well, let me just say this. First of all, Charlie and Brieanna, thanks very much for inviting me to be on the show. And let me thank all of the DFA members for what they're doing every day. The truth is that politics, serious politics, is not easy, especially in the moment that we're living. And you can get very discouraged, and you can throw your hands up, and you can moan and groan, you can do everything you want to do. But at the end of the day, what we are fighting for is not just ourselves. We're fighting for our kids, we're fighting for my 7 grandchildren, and we're fighting for people all over the world. And the way we win these struggles, and what DFA is all about, is the understanding that real change never takes place from the top on down. It is always from the bottom on up. It is always grassroots struggle. That's the history of the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the gay movement, the environmental movement. Change only takes place when people get mobilized and stand up and fight for what's right. And that's what DFA is doing. So I am a big, big fan of DFA, and that goes above and beyond the support you gave me in my campaign, which I appreciate very much. It's what you are doing every single day and what I know you will continue to do. So thank you guys for all that you're doing to create a progressive America.
Thanks, Senator Sanders. That actually means a lot, especially coming from you. And, you know, speaking of this current administration, I just want to know, how do you think that we balance responding to and fighting back against the bigotry and hate coming out of the White House versus our need to constantly articulate a clear progressive vision for the country?
Well, that is a great question because it is simply not good enough to wake up in the morning and say, oh, my God, look what Trump is doing on DACA. Look what Trump is doing on climate change. Look what Trump is doing with UNESCO. Look what Trump is doing here and doing there, and just criticizing Trump. We have got to do that. But on the other hand, the only way you get people moving forward is by laying out an agenda that makes sense to their lives. And maybe the major point that I want to make tonight, and I hope people do not forget it, is that on every major issue facing this country, we are the majority. Donald Trump, in almost every instance, his views represent a small minority. And I also want to remind people that we are making significant progress. I know who the President of the United States is, believe me, and I know what he's doing. But I also know that on issue after issue, more and more people are looking at progressive alternatives. Let me just give you one example, and we'll talk about more of this stuff tonight. Mm-hmm. If we were on the phone 5 or 6 years ago, and I talked about raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, people would have said, oh, that's a great idea, it'll never happen. But you know what? Because of Good Jobs Nation and the fight for 15 people and fast food workers all over this country, we are seeing enormous progress in community after community, state after state, in raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. What was considered radical 6 years ago is today mainstream. It's the Democratic Party's position. So that is true not only on minimum wage, it's true on many, many other issues. Our job is to educate, organize, go forward with a progressive agenda that says to the working people of this country, you know what, we don't need tax breaks for billionaires, we need health care for all, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I think that's really great. And in fact, you know, in your recent CNN debate with Lindsey Graham and Bill Cassidy, you know, you brought up the fact that you've brought this up over and over again over years about how the United States is the only first world country that does not offer universal health care to its citizens. I'm wondering, I mean, you know, you've been great at creating new momentum for this and in building new energy, but what makes Congress so hostile to the idea of providing health care to everyone?
Well, let me give you just a few hints. In the last 25 years, pharmaceutical industry has spent well over $2 billion, that's a B, in lobbying and campaign contributions. The insurance companies have spent a fortune in lobbying and in campaign contributions. These guys have enormous amounts of money, and they have enormous influence. But what we are seeing is that the effort on the part of the Republicans to repeal and or replace the Affordable Care Act turned out to be an enormously unpopular initiative. It turns out that that effort was one of the least popular pieces of legislation in the modern history of this country, even less popular than bailing out Wall Street. So the American people understand that, yeah, of course we have problems in health care. Our job is to go forward, not to throw 30 million people off of health insurance. So what we have been trying to do on this, Charlie, is fight a two-pronged attack. Number one, we've got to prevent the disaster. Imagine what it would look like in this country if in a couple of years 30 million Americans lost the health insurance they have. Just think about it for a second. How cruel, how unbelievably horrific that is. There are people out there listening to this program tonight who are dealing with cancer, they're dealing with heart disease, they're dealing with diabetes. Life insurance, the insurance that they have now, their health insurance, is their lifeline. It keeps them alive. And the Republicans wanted to end that. So we have to fight back vigorously, and we manage on 5 separate occasions with the support of millions of Americans going to rallies and town meetings, grassroots efforts. We defeated them. But that is not good enough. The status quo on health care is not good enough. As you've just said, every other major country on earth guarantees health care to all people. They do it 50 miles away from where I am talking to you tonight. I'm in Burlington, Vermont. 50 miles away is Canada. They've had a healthcare system guaranteeing healthcare to all people for decades. UK, France, Germany, Scandinavia, they all do it. And more people understand that there is something wrong when we're the only major country not to guarantee healthcare to all people. And on top of that, we're spending twice as much per capita on healthcare, almost $10,000 every year, twice as much as any other country, and our healthcare outcomes are not particularly good. So the momentum is with us. We've got 16 co-sponsors in the Senate. John Conyers has more in the House, and I think we are moving forward to the day when the United States will join the rest of the industrialized world.
Yeah, and you know, one of the important things to keep that momentum is, you know, electing progressive candidates who are willing to support Medicare for all. And it just makes me think that, you know, the November elections are coming up just a few weeks away. What kind of advice do you have for activists and DFA members that they can do over the next few weeks to support progressive candidates?
Well, you know, I introduced Medicare for All legislation a few years ago. And you know how many co-sponsors I had? 0. Introduced it this year, and I had 16 co-sponsors. You know why? You know what the difference was? The difference was grassroots America. And all over this country, members of the Senate would go to town meetings and they talk about issues, and somebody would raise their hand and say, Senator, what are you going to do about single-payer health care? What are you going to do about guaranteeing health care to all people? And people would cheer, and hundreds of people would say, that's where we want to go. So these senators come back to Washington and they say, hey, you know what? Not only is Medicare for all the right thing to do, politically it is the popular thing to do. Now, I don't have the latest poll in front of me, but every poll that I've seen shows that a significant majority of Democrats believe in Medicare for all, and a majority of the American people now believe in it. So the grassroots of this country have made Medicare for all good politics. Let's keep doing that. When you put the pressure on candidates, they're going to look around them and say, you know what, if I want to get elected, I better support Medicare for all.
Mm-hmm. You know, Bernie, one of the things that we've talked about when we're talking about candidates before, and I've heard you talk a little bit about this, is the idea that it's important not just to beat Republicans and replace them with good, strong progressives, but sometimes it's important to take on Democrats themselves and replace them with good, strong progressives. How important do you think primary challenges of bad Democrats are to making sure that we have the leaders both on the local level and in Washington who can help us realize our political revolution?
Well, Charlie, I think that's a decision that candidates, that the people in every congressional district around this country are going to have to make, and every city are going to have to make. They're going to have to look around them and see whether they're satisfied with the status quo, satisfied with the incumbent, if that incumbent is a Democrat, and they're not happy with them. That's a decision that has to be made. But here's another point that I want to make, which I think is equally important. It is stunning to me, that we have a national party called the Democratic Party, which is virtually non-existent in half of the states in this country. How does that happen? How do you be a national party when it's some of the poorest states, some of the states where working people are struggling the hardest? You have right-wing Republican governors, right-wing Republican senators, right-wing state legislatures. How does that happen? And one of the points that I have been fighting for, and I think we're making a little bit of progress, but we've got to do more, is to get people involved, not just in the so-called blue states. I'm not a big fan of blue state, red state. I don't believe in that stuff. I believe that every state has a majority of the people who are working people, and progressives should be doing well in every state in this country. But if you live in Utah, or you live in Missouri, or you live in Kansas, or you live in Idaho, you know what? Get involved. And you may not win this year, but you got to plant your flag at some point. You got to build your movement. I remember I was out in Utah, which is obviously a very conservative state. I was out there a couple of months ago. This woman there started crying. And I said, God, what did I do to make you cry? Why are you crying? And she said, you know why I'm crying? Because you're the first national politician, progressive politician, to come to Utah in my lifetime. All right? That shouldn't be happening. All right? So we need people in 50 states in this country, in the territories, to start standing up and getting involved. And you can win. Don't tell me that we can't win in Kansas, and don't tell me we can't win in Idaho. We can do it. Maybe not tomorrow, but we can't do it, and we never will do it unless we start today.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the Democratic Party itself is getting better? I have a question from Steven Schubert in Ann Arbor, Washington, and his question is, will the DNC change to become more responsive to progressive issues? And you've certainly been working a lot with the DNC this year. You did your tour with Tom Perez early on. You've done some stumping for candidates for them. I'm wondering, with Keith Ellison there, he didn't win, but he's a vice chair, and he's sort of bringing back the 50-state strategy. Do you feel like it's changing for the better? Or
Charlie, it is. It is, but I'm not going to tell you there is not, it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. There is no question that you have some Democrats who understand that when in the last 9 years we have lost the White House, we have lost the Senate, you lost the Congress, 2/3 of governors' chairs now are controlled by Republicans, 2/3, and you lost 1,000 legislative seats over the last 9 years or so. There are some leading Democrats who say, maybe that model isn't working. Maybe we are doing something wrong. Maybe we got to open the doors to young people and to working people and to progressives. Maybe we need more energy in the party. There are some. On the other hand, I will be very frank with you and tell you there are other people who believe, hey, this is my party. I own it. I've always owned it. I've been active in it. I contribute money to it. I don't want other people coming into it. And if the whole ship goes down, it goes down, but it's our ship, and we're going to take it, and we will be the leaders. So you got that kind of split. I hope very much. And what we have been seeing, we were seeing now in 6, 7 states where progressives have become chairs of the state party. We're seeing that at all levels. So just get involved. And you tell people who say you can't get involved, this is your country, it's your party, and you will bring your friends in and fight for a progressive agenda in any and every way you can.
Yep, that's also important. And, you know, a lot of people are stuck in the middle. Their spirits can be deflated. You know, it gets really hard when you're working, especially with Trump in the White House and Republicans all over the country. And, you know, one of the questions that our members submitted, Susan Steigerwalt in Detroit, Michigan, she just wants to know, how do you keep your spirits up when fighting this administration?
Well, I have the advantage. I mean, first of all, let me be very honest with you and tell you it is horribly discouraging. I mean, some day you wake up. I mean, what's going on in Puerto Rico right now and the lack of response to the horrendous things that Trump says to the people of Puerto Rico with the DACA program throwing 800,000 young kids off of or threatening to take away their legal status. The idea of throwing 30 million people off of health insurance, the attacks on women's rights, on transgender people, it is very discouraging. But I have the advantage that a lot of people don't have, and that I do in my own state, get around the state. Tuesday night, I should say, we had a meeting in Castleton, Vermont, a small town. They have a small university there. We had 400 young people coming out saying, yeah, we think the time is right for the United States to make sure that every person in this country, regardless of income, gets a college education, and that we make public colleges and universities tuition-free. And I had the opportunity to go all over this country. And it is a beautiful country with incredibly beautiful people. So, Brieanna, to answer your question, I get my inspiration really not from not from Capitol Hill, but from the people that I see all over this nation who are trying to do the right thing, who are standing up and fighting and winning victories. Winning victories. Let's not underestimate just one fact here. In the midst of a discouraging time. For years now, as Donald Trump will tell you, the Republicans have talked about repealing Obamacare and throwing millions of people off of health insurance. On 5 separate occasions, they tried to do it, and we beat them back. Okay? Yeah. And we are gaining momentum for Medicare for all. They control the House, the Senate, and the White House. We beat them on 5 separate occasions. So I get inspired by the activism of people, by the decency of so many of our people, and by the knowledge that on virtually every major issue, the American people strongly disagree with the president.
Mm-hmm. You know, this is one of the things that really makes you such a great senator, is because you understand that what happens in D.C. is not what is reflected across America. That right. The grassroots, you know, they agree overall with our issues. I mean, the majority of Americans support everything from raising minimum wage to universal health care to, I mean, you name it, they're on our side across the board.
Charlie, and this is a point never to forget. Yeah. I know sometimes people, progressives, think, oh, we're courageous, we're taking on the world. Sorry, we are in the majority, all right? Right? We are the majority. It is Trump. How would you like to be a Republican senator going home to your state when you got 20% of the people thinking that throwing 30 million people off of health insurance is a good idea? You know, right. They are nobody believes that you should tax breaks to billionaires and cut Medicare or Medicaid. That's what they are doing. So please, everybody, don't forget for 1 second whether it is raising the minimum wage, pay equity for women, rebuilding our infrastructure, Medicare for all, reform of a broken criminal justice system, immigration reform. On all of those issues and many, many more, the majority of the American people are on our side. period.
Right.
Now, there are some social issues where the country is really divided. But on economic issues, we are in the majority.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Bree and I are about to start taking live questions from our members, but I want to, remind people that are listening right now that if you do have a live question for Senator Sanders, you can press 0 on your phone now, and you'll be connected with a DFA staff member. So, again, you can just press 0 right now if you'd like to ask a question, or, of course, if you're listening to this call on democracyforamerica.com, you can also submit the question through the web chat. Before we go to the first live question, I'm going to do one more from our pre-submitted questions. Joe Crane in Kansas City, Missouri asks, Trump rotates through the segments of population he likes to attack, never giving enough time for us to respond to one before he hits on another. He does real damage each time. So what should be our strategy that we can use to counter that and have an impact?
Well, I think that speaks to the very first question that you ask, and it's a two-pronged approach. It is taking him on when he appeals to racism or sexism or homophobia or xenophobia. Whenever he tries to divide us up, we have got to fight back. But simultaneously, at the exact same time, we have got to go forward with a progressive agenda. Go out to your conservative friends who may respond to some of Trump's rhetoric and ask them whether or not they can afford to send their kids to college. Ask them whether or not they can afford the health care that they have. Ask them if they can make it on $10 an hour. Ask them if they want decent jobs helping to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure. And I think you will find a lot more support that you might not anticipate. So it's a two-pronged attack. It's not accepting for 1 second the effort on Trump's part, all politically calculated, to try to divide us up by the color of our skin or where we were born. And on the other hand, keep pushing forward with a progressive agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good message. Why don't we go to some live calls? I think it looks like we've got Cynthia from Orange County, California. Cynthia, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
Fantastic. Why don't you ask your question?
Yes, I was wanting to know about this possibility of the Republicans calling a constitutional convention and what horrors that might bring about.
Well, you're right. Apparently there is, I don't think it's imminent, but it is a possibility. And if they called a constitutional convention, everything is on the table, and they could wreak havoc with our Constitution and with the social fabric of America. And that speaks to the need for us to start gaining governor's chairs and state legislative seats all over this country.
Awesome.
Excellent. Well, why don't we move to the next question? Bree, you got another one?
Yeah, it looks like we have Steve on the line from Connecticut. Steve, are you there?
Hey, I'm here. Hey, Senator Sanders, it's great to be able to talk with you. My concern is that, I watch the news, and maybe I agree with Trump a little bit in that I think I see a lot of fake news. But, I see the world, like this country needs to talk about income inequality, global climate change, the corporate ownership of our government, on and on and on, these issues. But on the news, I don't see those issues being talked about. I just see these, a corporate line, a narrative, if you will. And a couple of days ago, I watched Chuck Todd equate you, Senator, to Steve Bannon, and said you were destroying factions of the Democratic Party. So I was wondering if you could recommend to us, the people, the progressives, sources of news that you consider reputable.
Sorry. It looks like we lost Steve.
Okay, well, first of all, Steve, let me pick up on Steve's point. I wrote a book last year. It was called Our Revolution. And the whole last chapter dealt with exactly the issue that Steve was talking about. I don't believe in, Trump's idea of quote unquote fake news. Everybody in the New York Times and the Washington Post is terrible. They lie all the time. That's crap. That's just not true. Every day there are wonderful articles, important articles telling us things that we didn't know. But Steve's point, and this is the point that I made in my chapter, is that by definition, when you have news media owned by large multinational media conglomerates, they have real conflicts of interest as to what they will emphasize. So we know if there's an act of violence, for example, or there is a tremendous weather disturbance, so there's a hurricane, all of which is important, you're going to see day after day after day. But I want listeners just to think about this one thing. The United States is the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people. We pay the highest prices in the world by far for prescription drugs. And we spend twice as much per capita on health care any other country. Can anybody out there think hard and tell me the last time you saw a television program which talked about that reality? Why do we spend twice as much per capita on health care? Why do we pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs? It is likely you have not seen one program on that. Give you another example. Most Americans, whether you're progressives or conservatives, understand that our campaign finance system is corrupt. Our political system is now absolutely corrupt. Do the American people believe that billionaires should be able to spend unlimited amounts of money to buy elections? No, the American people overwhelmingly do not. But you know who benefits, Charlie and Brieanna? Do you know who benefits from Citizens United? Do you know the entity in this country that benefits the most is the television industry.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's the television industry.
Yeah.
When you see these independent expenditures, the committee for this or the Koch brothers committee for that, spending zillions of dollars on TV ads, the TV stations all over this country are laughing all the way to the bank. You tell me, Charlie, Brieanna, jump in here. When's the last time you saw a serious program devoted to maybe the most important issue facing our country, and that is the corruption of our political system? Can you recall seeing any?
No. Not common. We just did a movie night with our members where we showed the Greg Palast movie, a documentary all about the best democracy you can buy, and that's the only way that people are getting this kind of information, is they're getting it because they personally choose to watch a documentary that's poorly funded and doesn't get any distribution. It's frustrating. Right. It's a great example of what you're talking about.
Steve's point is right on, and that is climate change for years. I mean, you would have on television, while the scientific community was virtually unanimous about the reality and the damage of climate change, you would have on television, well, there are two sides to the story. Professor X says this, Professor Y. That's not the case. But so on almost every really deeply important economic issue, the corporate media is not going to be there. Their focus will be on many other things, not to say that those other things are not important. But the issues of inequality, the issues of the need for health care for all, the need for campaign finance reform, you ain't going to see the corporate media there.
Yeah. And speaking of climate change, we have another caller from Michigan. Jill, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
All right. Go ahead and ask your question to Senator Sanders.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Sanders, for talking with us tonight. I just watched the Frontline program regarding the rise to power of Scott Pruitt and the way he is dismantling the EPA little by little. And I would like to know why the Democrats don't regularly go to coal counties and states and talk about the benefits of clean energy. Good. And try to help get jobs there.
Good.
Try to, somehow make them see that we care about them and their jobs.
Well, Jill, you raised two very important issues. I mean, the issue of climate change and the issue of why Democrats are not going into Kentucky and going into West Virginia. I will tell you, I have been to Kentucky on several occasions, been to West Virginia a number of occasions, and you have some really, really beautiful people in those states. Really, I just felt very comfortable in those states. And our job is to do exactly as you say, and that is to make it clear to the people in coal country, or what was formerly coal country, that the truth is coal is not coming back because, among other things, the corporate world now is investing in sustainable energy, not in fossil fuels. And we're seeing an incredible growth in solar. We're seeing growth in wind in the United States and all over the world. That is the future. And it does a real disservice to the very hardworking people in West Virginia and in Kentucky, very decent people who are struggling right now with a number of issues, including opioids, to keep telling them what is not true. And our job is to invest in those communities that have been hit by the ending of the coal industry and help them recover in a number of ways, but also, as Jill says, helping them build a sustainable, clean energy economy. But the last point, again, is that Democrats are going to have to go, and progressives are going to have to go into Kentucky and into West Virginia. It was amazing to me, just one point, when I think about Kentucky. Kentucky is represented, of course, in the Senate by Mitch McConnell and by Rand Paul. Kentucky, it turns out, was the state in the country, guys, that did best under the Affordable Care Act. Their rate of uninsured plummeted. I think it went from, I could be wrong on this by a few points, but I think it went from 20% uninsured down to 6 or 7% uninsured. So for the people of Kentucky, the Affordable Care Act was an enormous step forward. And you have the leader of the Senate trying to repeal it, and Rand Paul saying it doesn't go far, the repeal doesn't go far enough. How does that happen? How does it happen that in a state that benefited the most from the Affordable Care Act, your two senators are working night and day to repeal it? Mm-hmm. That's the state of democracy in America today, and that's how unresponsive many elected officials are to their people.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think it's another example, too, of exactly what we were just talking about with the last answer, the way that the media is run by corporations and Citizens United with the amount of money that comes into all this. I mean, it seems to me like there's no question that when you see Rand Paul and Mitch McConnell out there stumping against this health care when it's doing such good in their states, it has to be because of the money that's coming into their campaigns.
I think that has a lot that has a lot to do with it, I would say, yes. Yeah, and that's the whole ideology. We can go back to it, maybe we'll discuss later, because it's not, again, not talked about enough. Who are the Koch brothers? What is their agenda? And why are they, two brothers, perhaps more powerful politically than either the Democratic or Republican Party? Who are they? What do they want?
Right, money. That's the answer. They want more money. It's always about money, I think. Let's keep talking about that, but let's also take a call from John. He's in Flushing, Michigan. He's got a really great question for you that I think is especially relevant in the times of Trump. John, are you there?
Yes.
Great. Why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Okay. My question, and I don't know if you could have an answer for it, but our president has shown himself to be unstable, and he's got nuclear codes. How do we keep him from starting a nuclear war?
Well, John, let me tell you something. That is a question that I wake up every day thinking about. And, Bob Corker, I don't know if you know, Bob Corker is a senator from Tennessee, Republican, conservative guy, but a smart guy and a decent guy. And he's the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. And, Corker made the point that the White House right now is like, what did he call it, an adult care center. And when the adults disappear and they leave Trump alone, incredibly crazy things happen. Tweets go out that are beyond belief. That's a scary way to run a country. And I think, John, to answer your question, I was just talking to some people today about this, is I think the Congress has got to be more aggressive in reasserting the constitutional right of the Congress to make war, not the president. And we have to, especially with this president, make it very clear that it is the Congress that will decide when this country goes to war, not the president when he has a bad day. So that's, I think, the goal that we have to move forward. And there is now a resolution, actually, moving forward a little bit dealing with this issue, and that is the role of Saudi Arabia in Yemen and American support for that effort, and making sure that Congress gets much more decisively involved. But bottom line is Congress has got to assert its constitutional rights and make sure this president understands he does not have the power to take this country into war without the permission of the Congress.
That was a great answer, Senator Sanders. I do have another caller for you, Robert from Guilford, Connecticut. Robert, are you on the line?
I am on the line. Yes, Senator, thank you for taking my call. My question is about your Medicare for All bill. Right now, as we all know, even if this with a Republican majority Congress and with a Republican in the White House, this bill is not going to be signed into law until at least 2021, which means that we have 3 years to, get the support and to get the details of the bill fleshed out so that it's good and ready to go. What my question for you, Senator, is what are you and Senators Blumenthal, Harris, Gillibrand, et cetera, doing to make that happen?
Good.
And the reason I ask is because I think of the Republicans, all they did was say repeal and replace, repeal and replace, repeal and replace, but did nothing to actually figure out what that meant. And so when they finally had the chance to do it, they've lost every time, partially because of their lack of preparation.
Fortunately for us, right? Robert, you raise a very good point, and among many other issues, and we've touched on some of them tonight, there's a whole lot of stuff that has to be done. What I and other senators and members of Congress will do is take this issue out to the American people. And you're right. This is a complicated issue. Nobody gets it all right. And we want input from the American people. Had a great meeting in Detroit, Michigan a couple of months ago with John Conyers. Really good turnout in Detroit. We're going to probably hold a town meeting on Medicare just to educate the American people about what it means, hearing from doctors, hearing from nurses, hearing from patients. What does a Medicare for all single-payer system mean? And you know what? A lot of people are dissatisfied with the status quo, but they don't know what that means. We have, in the planning stages right now, I'm going to be going up to Canada to talk to people in the healthcare field there to learn from them. But I think Robert's point is well taken. But let me just summarize, to my mind, the essential elements of what a Medicare for all system is. There are a lot of different national health care programs all over the world. The Canadian system is different than the British system, which is different than the German system. What we have proposed more or less comes closest to what they do in Canada, which means that your doctors will practice in exactly the same way they do now. Your nonprofit hospitals will be running in the same way they run now, except the one payer, the single payer, will be the government. You will no longer have to pay. Now, here's the good news. Now, what you're going to see and have seen is people saying, Sanders' proposal is going to raise everybody's going to be paying incredibly more in taxes. It's going to cost a fortune. What they forget to tell you is that people are not going to be paying any private insurance. Any private insurance. So if you are now self-employed and you're paying $15,000 a year for your family of four, you're not going to have to pay that. If you are an employer right now, paying $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 for your employee, you're not going to have to pay that. And if you're a worker, paying $5,000 in premiums and deductibles, you're not going to have to pay that. That's gone. And what will happen is, yes, you will have to pay, if you're under $29,000 a year, more in taxes. But for the average family in America, that family in the middle of the economy, you are going to be better off financially under a Medicare for all system. You're going to pay more in taxes, but that will be more than balanced by what you will not be paying in private insurance. And by the way, to answer Robert's question, the other thing that we're doing is reaching out to the business community. Small businesses are getting killed by the current healthcare system. Our proposal will save them time and money as well. So Robert's right. There's a whole lot of work that has to be done. We're going to hold town meetings all over the country. We're going to do meetings online, live streaming them. We're going to bring educators. We're going to bring business people. We're going to bring doctors and nurses into the discussion. But I do want, when we're ready to move this thing, the American people to know what Medicare for All single payer is really about.
Awesome. And, Senator Sanders, one of the things that you've been really good at is also taking on the pharmaceutical industries. And we actually have another caller that has a question about that. Philip from Springfield, Missouri. Philip, are you on the line?
How do you do? Yes, I'm right here. And, yeah?
Go ahead and ask Senator Sanders your question.
Okay, my question is, are there any ideas on the table about opening wide the gates to foreign competition in the areas of pharmaceutical products and hospital equipment? Because we have been starved for competition. The pharmaceuticals in our country have a monopoly. They have us right where they want us. They make us pay 7 to 11 times more than they make foreigners pay, even for their products. And we even pay more for hospitalization. A visit to the emergency room is $3,000, and it is just exceedingly more expensive than anywhere in the world, and we need to open the gates of competition. Are there any irons in the fire?
Well, Philip, here's what I am working on. And let me back up by telling you that it is quite possible. There's really heavy-duty competition between the greed of Wall Street and the greed of the pharmaceutical industry. Hard to say which particular entity is uglier. But the pharmaceutical industry will certainly hold up with any entity as being incredibly, incredibly greedy. They want it all. And one of the things they do, and this is the point that Philip made, is they will manufacture a product which will be sold in this country for X dollars. It will be sold abroad for half or a third of the cost. Now, why is that? The reason is that every other major country has a national health care program, and they sit down with the drug companies and they say, we're not going to let you charge anything you want. We are going to negotiate drug prices with you. And the result is that countries all over the world, as Philip indicated, will pay 50%, 60%, 70%, depending on the drug, less than we pay in the United States. One solution. Now, remember also that you have all of these Republicans who love unfettered free trade. I don't love unfettered free trade, but they do. So why don't we have, we have unfettered free trade in refrigerators, in steel, in automobiles in many cases. How come we don't have it in prescription drugs? Why can't your pharmacist or your pharmaceutical distributor be able to go to Canada and buy the same product for half the price that it's sold in the United States? That makes sense, doesn't it? That's what free trade is supposed to be about. Well, the pharmaceutical industry has said no to that. And they have made it, impossible for us to do that. I was the first member of the United States Congress to take Americans across the Canadian border to buy medicine at a fraction of the price they were paying in Vermont. A lot of others have since done that. Millions of Americans are now buying their prescription drugs abroad. But what we have got to do is allow pharmacists and distributors to be able to get the best price that they can from any country that has a strong safety regulatory system. And I've introduced legislation to do that, and that would significantly lower the price of medicine in this country. The other thing, obviously, that we have to do is have Medicare start negotiating prices with the drug companies, just as the Veterans Administration does.
Yeah, that's right. All that is right on target. We're having a great conversation. 45 minutes in so far. You haven't stopped. You've been taking rapid-fire questions. I just want to thank you so much for doing that. We're going to keep taking questions. But, it's one of the things that's really refreshing about talking with you, Senator, is that, you can talk about a wide range of issues. You know the details. You know the facts. And you know how to talk about it in a way that is both real and breaks down the reality of how difficult it is while still being very inspiring. And that's a real talent. I just got to mark that before we go to the next call. So here's the next call. This is from Ellie in Ventura, California. Ellie, are you there?
I'm there. Thank you. Bernie, what can we do as activists to stop the Senate from passing a budget that slashes Medicare by $500 billion and strips Medicaid by $1.5 trillion, leaving children, seniors, and disabled in harm's way without any support system, without any funds out in the street.
Ellie,
what can we do?
Ellie, thank you so much for raising that issue. And I thank you for two reasons. Number one, I'm the ranking member, that's the leader of the opposition on the Budget Committee. So I'm dealing with this stuff. And when Congress reconvenes next week, I suspect this will be on the floor, and I'm going to have to be very, very active in opposition. And second of all, thank you for raising the issue. Because when we talk about corporate media, and a few minutes ago, in response to a question, I think it was, I can't remember who asked that question, in response to a question we talked about corporate media, what we are looking at right now, and what Ellie is talking about, is the cruelest, most destructive budget in the modern history of the United States by far. It has gotten almost no media attention, and I suspect the vast majority of the American people do not have a clue about what it is about. We are working very hard on my social media, BernieSanders.gov. We have posts virtually every day about the budget. Let me just pick up where Ellie left off. This is, when I describe this budget, Brieanna and Charlie, people will say, well, it can't be that bad. Bernie's kind of exaggerating, he's being politically. It is this bad. This is what it does. Over a 10-year period, it provides $1.9 trillion in tax breaks to the top 1%, the people who are already doing phenomenally well. It provides $269 billion in tax breaks to the top 0.2% through the repeal of the estate tax, which only benefits families like the Walton family or the Koch brothers family or the Sheldon Adelson family, or, by the way, the Trump family, multimillionaire, billionaire families, top 0.2%. And then after having done that, what it also does is make incredibly destructive cuts to programs that working class people desperately need. $1 trillion in cut to Medicaid, throwing 15 million people off of health insurance. This is what they try to do under their so-called health care reform. They're back again. In addition to that, there are some $400 billion cuts in Medicare. Now, you remember when Trump ran for president? I will not cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Remember all that? This budget would allow for massive cuts to Medicaid and Medicare, cuts to heating assistance, cuts to Pell Grants, cuts to Head Start, cuts to affordable housing, cuts to education. You name the important program, they cut it, and then they give huge tax breaks to billionaires. It is a horrible, horrible budget. It is coming to the floor of the United States Senate, I believe, next week. And the debate begins. And to answer Ellie's question, please, get on your phone and tell your senator, tell your member of Congress that you don't think it makes sense to give huge tax breaks to billionaires and cut programs the low-income and working people desperately need.
Excellent, excellent. It looks like we should take another call. I think we're going to switch gears a little bit away from healthcare and policy specifically. I've got Howard from Manhattan, New York, calling in. Howard, why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. First, Bernie, I just wanted to say be healthy and run in 2020.
Thank you.
The question is this. I think more important than anything is we've got to take back the House and/or Senate in 2018. And I don't hear or see the Democrats doing anything in particular. We've got to win those 24 seats. Now, clearly, you need the right candidate. But what I don't see, which I think is very important, is there are wonderful marketing companies and marketing people. I would go to Aflac, Apple, Prudential, try and hire their marketing people to basically understand the need and then get the message across in those 24 districts how we're going to deal with it. That's what I would do. I don't hear the Democrats doing anything like that.
Well, Howard, I certainly agree that creating a cogent message that people can understand is absolutely important, no question about it. But I also believe that grassroots organizing and knocking on doors and just talking face-to-face to millions of people is even more important. You know, maybe I'm just an old-fashioned guy, but I believe, and I know this is what DFA and other grassroots organizations attempt to do, and that is you just got to mobilize millions of people at the grassroots level. What we have got to do is have a message that gets people inspired, that brings them out to vote. If we could, last midterm election in 2014, Charlie or Brieanna, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think we had a voter turnout of something like 36, 37%. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that sounds about right. It was definitely low.
It was the lowest. I'm sorry, Brieanna, what did you want to say?
I was agreeing with Charlie.
Yeah, I think it was the lowest voter turnout since World War II, I believe. And Republicans did phenomenally well.
Yeah.
And if you have a 37% turnout, Republicans will continue to do well. If you have a 50, 60% turnout, Democrats and progressives will do well. So our job is, in every way, it's certainly crafting messages in a way that people can grasp them, but it is also just knocking on a hell of a lot of doors and getting people involved.
Mm-hmm. Well, I got a question. One of the questions submitted online for us was from Jackie, who asked, what is the response? What's the right response when a small business who claims that they can't afford to pay employees $15 an hour? This is something you've been fighting, for all across the country. I have a feeling you've got a really great answer for this question.
Well, the answer is twofold. First of all, no state or city has passed $15 an hour going into effect tomorrow. It phases in over a period of time. And second of all, I think overall what economists understand is that when you put more money into the pockets of working people, they're going to go out and start spending that money in a way that billionaires do not. So when you raise the minimum wage, when you give a pay increase to tens of millions of people, it is going to be a real economic stimulant which will impact small businesses all over this country because people will simply have more money to buy the goods and services that they need. And the other thing where it becomes an economic benefit is that one of the outrages of today's economy is that taxpayers and working people are supporting the wealthiest family in this country, families like the Walton family that owns Walmart. They are paying wages that are so low that many of their workers are forced to go on food stamps, Medicaid, and into government-subsidized housing. And who is paying for the food stamps and the subsidized housing and the Medicaid? Working people. Meanwhile, the Walton family is the wealthiest family in America. If we raise the minimum wage to a living wage, millions of people will no longer need those government programs in the way they need them today. So I think raising the minimum wage is a fundamentally right thing to do because in America, if you work 40 hours a week, you should not be living in poverty, period.
Well, that is that you're right on mark, of course, and absolutely an understatement. People working 40 hours a week should not be living in poverty. They should be living with real wages, should be able to buy a house, they should be able to buy a car, they should be able to actually invest in the economy they live in. Couldn't agree with you more with any of that. I want to wrap up with a question that about these recent debates you've been doing. You've been asked by CNN to join. First, I think it was Ted Cruz. You recently did one with Bill Cassidy and Lindsey Graham. And my understanding is you have another one coming up with Ted Cruz, I think, next week.
That's right.
These debates are fantastic. It's really exciting to see you out there being able to do almost presidential level conversations in front of a national audience about these issues. What is the upcoming one with Ted Cruz about, and how do you feel about these debates?
I think I very much appreciate CNN doing them. And by the way, it turns out that their ratings are quite high on these debates. The American people really want to hear these discussions.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
I'm not surprised either. The American people are not quite as dumb as some of the networks think they are, and they would like to hear real discussions. So the next one will be just on the issue that Ellie raised. It's going to be on the budget and taxes, but I think it's going to go broader than that. Cruz is a very, very conservative guy, and there'll be a real difference of opinion. And my focus will be on the fact that this country is moving toward an oligarchic form of society where you have a handful of multi-billionaires controlling our economy and our politics, and the rich are getting much richer while almost everybody else is getting poorer. And we need a tax system which helps us move toward more equality. We need a tax system which allows us to invest in our young people so that every person in this country, regardless of income, can get a college education, a tax system that helps us to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure. There'll be a really, to say the least, very different perspectives on those issues. So I look forward to that debate with Cruz.
I definitely look forward to it as well. I'm sure that almost everybody listening to this call feels exactly the same way. And I think that what you just said there at the end was a pretty good closer. You really talked a little bit about your vision. This call has been fantastic with the way you've been able to just respond right off the bat and with so much detail to so many different kinds of questions. So I really want to thank you, Senator Sanders, once again for joining us tonight and having this conversation with our members. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and DFA, keep up the great work.
Awesome. All right, well, Senator Sanders, he spent years fighting for progressive change in policies like Medicare for all and free college tuition, which, regrettably, we didn't talk too much about free college tuition. You definitely need to look into that. If you're not organizing to help make that happen, you can do that working with DFA. You can do that working with Bernie Sanders, with Our Revolution. We're working hard to make sure that happens. Because the key is he cannot do it alone. His support of candidates nationwide has helped elect other fierce progressives to both the Senate and the House who are ready to join him in working to make health care, make sure that it's a human right for all Americans.
That is exactly right, Charlie. And, the fight is at the national and at the local level. And we've seen thousands of activists who have been inspired to run everywhere across the country in all 50 states. And actually, DFA members and other activists nationwide have spent the last year marching in the streets, making phone calls, visiting their members of Congress, and speaking it up at town halls. They left everything on the field and working together defeated Trump Care 3 times. And, they've built support for Medicare for all.
Yeah, 17 original co-sponsors, as Bernie said just tonight.
Yep. And, in the Senate and also in the House, too. And, now across the country, we even have candidates like Randy Bryce, who's running against Paul Ryan in Wisconsin with a Medicare for All platform front and center in his campaign. And, that I think it's a solid strategy for flipping control of the House in 2018.
Right. That's right. But, we're not waiting for 2018 to drive progressive victory. As we've mentioned a couple times in this call already, DFA has endorsed a whole slate of bold progressive candidates who are going to win at the local level this November, less than 4 weeks away.
And that's why right now, until DFA members are going to be making phone calls directly to voters in targeted races all around the country, focused on getting out the vote. And, one way that everyone on this call can help make that happen is to sign up to host a phone bank in your home or your office. You can sign up to host a phone party for yourself or RSVP to attend another DFA members party. You can also just hop on over the weekend on our interactive DFA dialer and make calls right from the comfort of your home.
Right. Not only can members make calls from a call party or even their own home, we provide the scripts, the talking points, the phone numbers, everything that you would need to get started in making great calls. So with the next one, it's happening this Saturday. You can sign up by going to democracyforamerica.com/2017. So that's democracyforamerica.com/2017. And with that, I want to thank Senator Sanders. I want to thank Bree and, of course, all of you on the phone tonight for joining us. We have a lot of work to do to win. Let's go out and do it. Good night.